same thing where, they're Inuvialuit, and then you go to Greenland and they're Kalaallit, and like even within like Inuvialuit and Kalaallit, they even have their own, there's Eastern dialect, Eastern Greenlandic and Western Greenlandic, and then there's inland Canada, or things like that. And it's just like, you can't just look at a word that says Inipengurunga and be like, I am Eskimo, because that completely, you might as well just be saying Inuit or whatever, because I'd be like, I am Inuit, and that's like the broadest you can kind of go with that. There's just like a lot of things being cut out when you use that term, or like see it as a direct translation.
It's limiting.
Yeah.
And it's accommodating people that don't understand where we come from, to give them an easier word for us when we're all so diverse. Mm-hmm. Although we're connected and we celebrate that, we have our own subgroups just like everywhere else. And
just like, yeah, like you go down a grocery aisle and it's like Greek, Italian, like they have very specific, white people, I'd say they take a lot of pride in their heritage, so why can't we? And then you see on the other side of the aisle, it says Asian, where it's just like, there are so many different types of Asian, and it's just like, why do they have the space to be so specific, whether they're Norwegian or German or British, and we can't, like, take that kind of claim to our heritage?
I mean, it's not that difficult.
Yeah.
It's really not.
And I feel like a lot of the reluctance within our own community is just kind of like, well, people don't know what an Inuit are. Or like, it's just so much easier to say Eskimo, like I'm Eskimo, rather than being like I'm Inuit, because they're not going to understand it right away. But it's just like, it really just takes a little bit of time and enough people for that to just, that kind of lingers away.
I think it's also part of our nature to be so accommodating and so passive almost, to be very neutral, or to to not be upset by what people call us,
and to not be so outwardly vocal about it, to be like, well, you're wrong. I mean, there are people that would, they do passionately tackle that issue, and it's like, look at Canada, like they're able to completely, they turn around from an entire governmental last name structure in the 70s and totally like started going by Inuit, within just like a generation and a half. And it's like weird that some people are kind of like, well, I just have my own pride in it, like I'm reclaiming it for myself or whatever, but like that was never our word to claim in the first place. That was never our description of ourselves. There's already something that exists there. And I feel like a lot of the resistance to, or like a lot of people thinking that it's not offensive, is that they just aren't aware yet of what and why it's so offensive, like what it is that made it offensive, why it's offensive, and they've never been in like situations where they really had to see the side of it, I guess. But also, like, in our education system, like, we're not taught that the Inuit live halfway across the globe. It just took me being involved in certain organizations, kind of by chance. I had learned that through, ICC and stuff, that, like, we exist halfway across the world. We migrated from over here to Greenland, and there's like a lot of strength and a lot of value in that. I just feel like to continue forward using the term Eskimo, because we're fine with it here in America, based on just lack of education of what it is in the expansive form, it's just like such a thing to do to the other people. We've survived this much already as a whole, because it's the Inuit in Canada, Greenland, Russia, they dealt with the same troubles that we did. It would just be so dismissive and even disrespectful to our relatives, to our people, to just dismiss it just because we haven't experienced it ourselves. Whereas like here in America, like our history, it can be altered a little bit too, where you think of just like the education and what we're taught, we think it's like Inupiaq, Yupik, Athabascan, Tlingit, or whatever. We're taught to get that, and we're taught in the like Inksa setting, whereas we're in these groups and stuff, we're taught from an America perspective. Whereas like in Greenland, they grow up knowing and learning that we're a people that span across, they know that there's a connection, you know? Like, I had a friend from Greenland that said she had a whole class on our Alaska salmon fishery laws, things like that. And we're, you know, like, we're adults when we finally learn that there are people in Canada that, like, kind of look like us. Or, like, I heard there's a dialect that sounds like Inuit back in Greenland, you know? It's just like we, as a people that, like, traditionally is holistic, we're not looking things holistically. We're looking at it in an American way, and it's frankly very embarrassing that we are, because it's just like, it's really offensive, really ignorant, just to, not in the word in itself, but to just kind of turn your back a little bit to the rest of who you are. And it's just like, it should be less of, oh, like North Slope Inupiaq versus like Bering Strait Inupiaq, you know, they're kind of like the hierarchy of it. Whereas, you know, like, how many of these people understand that we don't expand up and down of the world, we expand across it, literally. And like, it just feels like there's a lot of humility that needs to be had when it comes to this, and like just education in general.
Although Jackie still sometimes uses the term Eskimo out of habit, she is making a concerted effort to minimize her use of the term.
I've definitely, you know, over the years have learned why I shouldn't be so outwardly like, I'm an Eskimo. I've even almost kind of gotten to the point of like not even liking calling it Eskimo dance. Kind of just being around and knowing Canadian Inuit and Greenlandic Inuit and just knowing their stance, but also, you know, in Canada they call that drum dancing. And like, I have seen like my friends' faces fall when I say Eskimo dance, you know, when I'm like telling a story or whatever, and they're just kind of like, you know, just because they just live in a different environment than we do. So I do, you know, I say like Inupiaq for like I'm Inupiaq. When I reference us, when I talk about us, like at a bigger view than just including Inupiaq, you know, I say Inuit instead. There's not really ever a time anymore where I use the term Eskimo, and then obviously like my company name is Eskimedia, which is just kind of, that has its story in itself too. And like, I even am kind of like, would this offend my friends? Like, I just kind of like, you know, I just like, would they, you know, but it's still a story. But I am definitely pulling away in a sense from saying that I'm Eskimo, and would rather say first that I'm Inupiaq, and then also Inuit or Alaska Native. You know, like, those are, you know, if anybody asked in genuine interest, I would say those first, where it's like, I'm Inupiaq, I'm Inuit, I'm Alaska Native, but also like, I am Eskimo, like, according to the government, according to my Nana card, I am Eskimo. But also, you know, it's just a term that I've learned to use less and become more aware of. But with this whole like Eskimo versus Inuit thing like exploding, I feel like it just exploded like this winter or whatever, when somebody had tweeted about it, and now, you know, it just kind of, you know, like a news station wrote an article about that going viral, and just like, it's becoming more public that it has a history or people have opinions about it. I just know that the resistance to it just comes from just a lack of understanding of what it really comes with. And that's what I would rather focus my energy on, is towards, you know, and that's kind of what I do with running the Kadigi zine, is just kind of like having my Inuits t-shirts and just kind of like, you know, educating them and not like shaming them, not making it like a negative approach where I'm like, you can't say Eskimo, it's offensive, you can't, you know, let's switch or whatever, and just kind of like providing more resources, providing more outlets for people to just like talk about what this Inuit word means and why that's like what we should gravitate towards from now into the future. It just, sometimes it feels like a really heavy thing when, like, for instance, you know, I see like a very respected and awesome Inupiaq guy tweet, it's like the people who say Eskimo is offensive, like, it's not that big of a deal, there's bigger things or whatever, and I'm like, this is actually a really big deal, because it tracks into the history of who we are and why we are the way we are today, because those people in the Canadian schools going by a number, an Eskimo identification number, there's a lot of like erasure in that, like foreign identity, because us as people in general, as Inupiaq people, you know, we all know there's a reason we're named something, there's a reason behind your name. Your name has a soul, your name has a spirit, and if you're a number, that's even like foreign letters and, you know, numbers and stuff. like, even that, you know, plays a role in the generational trauma that we carry, because, you know, they could have some kind of identity crisis or anything that comes from that, and it just kind of gets projected into their kid, and then, like, that misunderstanding and lack of knowledge comes with their parent, that stuff, which is layered on top of the parent, you know, being so erased. That goes into the next generation, and that's kind of where we are right now, where it's just kind of like all these layers of issues that we have, and someone can just dismiss it, even though they're an amazing, like, Inuit guy, like, you know, lives by the land, can speak a lot of it. It's just like, this is a small thing. It just makes me wonder, you know, I'm like, does he wonder why we have these issues? Does he ever go after answers, or does he just dismiss it completely, where he's like, I'm an Eskimo man? Like, you know, does he even know what he's saying when he says that? So, like, in that way, it can be really heavy to carry. And, you know, like, and I try to just convert that energy into being like, okay, this is why I need to push more forward with a, like, more positive perspective. You know, just keep working towards trying to educate it. There's a lot of pride. And it's just like, that's not who we are. There needs to be some humility thrown in. If we're basing our identity completely off of our pride, we need to question ourselves as Inuit people, or as Inuit, because that's not who we are. We all know that. You need to be humble. Like, you can't take too much pride in it. And if that's the sole reason things are happening, there's an issue.
Here, Jackie introduces an interesting concept on colonization.
A friend of mine brought this concept to me that kind of blew my mind a little. You know, it was kind of just like talking, like, I don't know. I will credit him with, he is an Inuit man, and he does have an anthropology degree, so he does have kind of like some cushion. Yeah, he's got some cushion to what he's saying. Like, he's thought about it very hard. Like, but so he had brought up this concept to me, and it's kind of shifted the way that I see things now too, just because it has my mind running about what we know is that we come from, you know, pretty much where, like, Russia and Alaska connect. And that's where we originated thousands and thousands of years ago. And then over those thousands of years, we've migrated towards Greenland, all the way, you know, all the way through Canada and Greenland and stuff. And I actually also, I'll just throw this in, is I learned recently that Canada, their Inuit, they were like, it was against the law in 1721. That's like a good 20 years before the U.S. was anything at all. They were already told not to practice their dancing and their songs. They were colonized that much more earlier than we were, because, you know, they're just across the water from Europe. And so there's that concept, you know, that we migrated in the West and went to the East or whatever. But my friend had brought up this concept where he's like, but the colonizers came from the East into the West through the Northwest Passage. So they went to Greenland first, then they went to Canada, then they went to Alaska. When it comes as far as, like, coming to Inuit lands, because, you know, like, it was the Russians that came into the, like, Yupik lands or whatever mainly, and so, and then into the Russian Inuit over there, so that's a little bit different. But, like, for Inuit, like, I mean, from the more northern ones, they came that way. So he was like, so you'd think that they'd learn along the way what works and what doesn't work, and so by the time they get to Alaska, they already experienced colonizers. They were experienced and know what they were doing. And so, you know, it just feels like there's things that, quote-unquote, worked pretty well here in Alaska. And I feel like using the term Eskimo was one of those. And
stripping people of their identity.
Yeah. And, like, knowing how to just be like, this is okay. You know, just kind of like...
to make us accept it more, to be more accepting, or to be more receptive to their changes.
Yeah.
They had to have been seasoned.
Yeah.
You know, they had to have had some experience and figured out what works best with the native people, and that's so disturbing.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's only been a few months that I was, like, introduced to that idea, but it's messed me up. Like, I'm just like, whoa, I see things totally different now. Because I just kind of, you know, they were doing what they thought they should be doing. They didn't know. But
right?
It's like, actually, they knew. Like, they knew who Eskimos were by the time they got to us. And
so crazy. That's like Stockholm syndrome, right? Like, they know how to take advantage of one person and make them, you know, and capture that. Is that what Stockholm is? It's like when you capture someone and you make them want to be with you, or make them...
yeah, you can convince them. Like,
that
they want to be there.
Yeah! And that's like...
yeah! It's insane! It's so, like, it added, like, more discomfort to me to, like, what our history is when it comes to colonization.
Some of the argument in rejecting the generalized word Inuit is that Yupik Eskimos don't consider themselves Inuit.
Yupik is not Inuit, and that's where some of the conversation comes to, you know, it's just like, you can't just call us Inuit because Yupiks aren't either. And that I've kind of